Getting the early numbers could be the key to success when betting on the NFL. That's why we're here to react to the Pinnacle openers and analyse where the market might move. Welcome to the opening line. Hello and welcome to the opening line. And after almost 5 months, 268 games, we are down to just 2 teams. And of course, the game that everyone's been waiting for. The Super Bowl is just 2 weeks away. And with the odds up at Pinnacle, it's time to discuss what we might expect from the biggest game in the NFL calendar. With me today are our 3 NFL betting experts. We've got Rufus Peabody, Eric Eager, and Andy Molitor. We will get into those all-important numbers for the big game a little bit later, but we can start off with a quick recap of the conference championship games. One perhaps a little bit more straightforward than the other, or certainly less debate to discuss anyway. So we'll start with that one. It was the Kansas City Chiefs. They outplayed the Buffalo Bills. They not only won, but they also covered the spread, which obviously we haven't seen too much of that this season, and the over came in on that one as well. Impressive performance from the Chiefs, but also a little bit of disappointment from the Bills, I guess. And to kick us off, Eric, I'll go to you. What did you make of it? Did you learn anything, or have those sort of high expectations people had of the Chiefs just been backed up?
It was weird because I think a lot of us, who held the Bills in high regard, they did some things in that game that were not characteristic of what they had done the whole season. You talk about the early down runs, like they had more early down runs in the first quarter of that game, seemingly, than they had in the first 3 quarters of the Buffalo game, I think against the Baltimore game combined. And then you look at the 4th down decisions they made. McDermott came out in the last day or so and basically said, look, I just wanted to increase my team's morale at the end of the half. And, it's like one of those things where I thought the Bills were sort of immune to those things, the way that they had acted all year. And that's why I think, people were backing them, going into the game and I think there was a decent amount of reasons you could make for that. Kansas City is going to always be this sort of weird anomaly now of a team that sort of, much like the LeBron teams, over the last 20 years, sort of coasted through the regular season. Like I posted on Twitter the scheme uniqueness stuff, and Reed, his scheme uniqueness continues to drift away from the origin where all the other teams are as the playoffs progress. It's just one of those, I think, weird cases, but I still firmly stand by the idea that if Josh Allen played his median game on Sunday, they probably have a chance to win or cover. But he just played poorly, and they didn't do a lot of the things that they normally do to be the efficient team that we saw them go 13-3 with. And
Rufus, over to you. I think a lot of people, and yourself included, said you kind of almost felt like you were free rolling with the Bills, given what was going on before the game. So what did you make of how things actually played out?
Mahomes did not look limited. Put it that way. I thought the turf toe would be a lot more of an issue just from seeing practices and obviously his mobility is very important in this game. But clearly he obviously, I'm sure he was in some pain and he was shot up, and I know he had that special cleat and everything, but he was just fine without running. And he was able to move around the pocket, which is what mattered. And I still like the logic behind why I took Buffalo there, just given the uncertainty. But it didn't work out this time.
And Andy, you were on the opposite side. Was it a no sweat win for you on the Chiefs?
I guess to kind of echo some of Eric's thoughts on, I was, obviously I bet on the Chiefs. I bet the Chiefs live. I bet the Chiefs live to win the first half. I just kept pounding the Chiefs, and I was still disappointed in McDermott. Even though it was beneficial for anything I bet, just how I feel about the NFL going forward, how I feel about some of these higher end AFC teams. I was kind of disappointed in how he played the game. I was disappointed in some of the decisions he made, and the Mahomes thing. God, Rufus had me all freaked out about that. And then Drew was hitting me up with, some of the stuff they do on third downs with with some of the, I don't know if they're truly designed runs, but where they clear people out and he just ends up scampering for 12 yards because they're in tight coverage down the field. We didn't see a lot of that, but like Rufus said, it seemed like he was fine with, with whatever they gave him to make his foot feel better. He was fine scampering around the pocket, moving around, sliding through there. So yeah, I think my biggest takeaway was some disappointment in Buffalo, just because it's not a game where, we'll see these guys one more time this year, and it's week 5, and let's not do anything silly and screw the end up. It's the playoffs. I just didn't understand when they went from 12 points to 9 points by kicking a field goal. That's not a big difference. I'm not sure what some of the the WPA models would say, or just your win percentage going from 12 points to 9 points. But Drew and I were watching the live lines, and when they were in the red zone there, the live handicap was like 6.5, and then after they kicked the field goal, it went to 8.5. It got worse for them by kicking the field goals twice. So it was mind numbing watching some of that. But I guess I'm glad the Kansas City that we saw early in the season against the Ravens, the Kansas City that can play well on offense repeatedly, I'm glad they showed up, because I think that's a more fun team to watch than some of what we saw late in the season. And obviously Eric was excited. That's his squad.
I was with Rufus. I bet Buffalo early in the week, and then when the news continued to come in, I did sort of change, especially live. I thought some of those live lines were a little short. At halftime, it was 8.5, which I felt like, wasn't necessarily, that was based upon maybe prior data as opposed to what was actually happening. But there was always a 10%, in my opinion, chance that he didn't play at all because of the concussion. The Chiefs legitimately had no control over the process, and that was always something you had to take into consideration, because it's an unfortunate thing. The turf toe, to me, as somebody who's had it before and everything, it's one of those where I think in a week 5 or 6 game, I think it matters a lot more, because turf toe is one of those that doesn't get better or worse really unless you take care of it. And with just 2 more games left, I would assume that they were going to do, he was just going to deal with it was a pain tolerance issue, and that would have been fine. Early in the season, it's one of those where you either shut the guy down or you significantly reduce his wear and tear early. But in a playoff game, I felt like he was going to give it everything he had. And he did look kind of slow. And you did see a significant difference in that offense. Mahomes' average depth of target was under 6 yards the other day. It was the lowest among all quarterbacks in the championship round. Buffalo did basically he had the drop to Hill and stuff, but they weren't exactly like this deep shot team. They were making big plays with their playmakers after the catch. And one of the interesting things about the Chiefs, and they just create separation. So when Mahomes fakes out Milano and is being dragged to the ground, he doesn't have to throw the ball to the perfect shoulder because there's no one around Kelsey for 5 yards. The margin for error they give the best quarterback in the NFL is immense, and it's really hard to beat.
Well, that one was fairly simple and straightforward. With the NFC game, we obviously had the underdogs coming through, Tom Brady and the Buccaneers getting past the Packers. It kind of felt like Green Bay had plenty of opportunities to get themselves back into it. Some dubious calls in the game, one on the officiating front, but there's one that clearly jumps out, and that was the 4th and goal where LaFleur went for the field goal. Now, I think I gave a shout out to Matt Davidow a few weeks back on here, and his Twitter was popping off. I saw with some debate on that. Rufus, what was your thoughts on the decision now? Some people thought it was right, some people thought it was wrong, some people weirdly thought the analytics was right, but the decision was still wrong. It's all a bit of a mess. So what did you make of it?
Yeah, in real time, I thought it probably was the wrong decision, but without having any model. But then when I saw Davidow's tweet, I was interested to see what he said. When I saw his tweet, I was like, I can see that, because I do think people overall underestimate the difficulty of they underestimate overtime. They don't take that into account. You're 8-point game, it's a 1-possession game. period, right? I mean, in this situation, you need the touchdown. You need to convert basically 4th and goal at the 8-yard line, 9-yard line.
Yeah.
You got to convert that, then convert the 2-point conversion. And then even if you do that, you still have to stop Tom Brady from getting into field goal range at the end of the game. So whereas you kick the field goal, they're probably going to play more conservative. I mean, they will in that situation. They're trying to run out the clock, and you get the ball back, you can win the game outright. So I'm interested in hearing more about sort of what some of those conditional probabilities were in his model, because I know he does it's simulated out at the play level. It takes into account the quarterbacks, the teams. There are things that are not really obviously unknowable. You don't know exactly how the Bucs are going to come out on offense there. With 2:02 left, they actually were. Mickens goes down, and everybody's like, it's a huge mistake. But at the same time, then the Bucs can throw the ball on first down because there's absolutely no downside. So they get the 9 yards. Then the Bucs, even though Tom Brady was trying to, you heard him mouthing about decline the penalty. They didn't decline the penalty, but and it came down to it. If that pass interference hadn't been called, like Green Bay gets the ball back there, and they get the ball back. I don't know what the chances what you guys would make the chances there. I'm thinking David L's probably a little bit higher. He's very high on Rodgers and good, I guess, good quarterbacks, especially in this day and age, being able to sort of engineer these comebacks when you have all 4 downs to work with. So we're going to have him on the podcast this week, and so that should be really interesting to hear some of his thoughts. But I've talked to him privately too, and he's he said like, okay, if you can move a few numbers a little bit, I guess, but it's in the general ballpark. And I know a lot of the criticism wasn't just, well, was this the right decision? Because he said, okay, the win probably went from 25% to 27.5%. It's the fact that people were saying, oh no, the win probably should have been like in the 10% range. But as someone who was live in that game, like I did not ever see the win probability drop that low. It was in the 20s, at least. Yeah,
I think Seth even tweeted that in a reply that during the commercial break, it was trading at like plus 300.
Yeah.
That implies that it was right there. Yeah, I didn't understand the people that were saying that had a problem with David Howe's tweet as far as that, saying it should be like a 10 to 12%. And well, there's a market for that. If you think it's 10 or 12%, you should have slammed the other side. But yeah, that what you said too, that's been rattling around my brain for a couple days now. It's just all the different, I don't want to say it's not coin flips. Some of them are coin flips. I mean, being a short favorite in overtime is likely a coin flip. I don't know what you put the probability at. I'd love to hear this. I'm excited to hear him be on the show, and hopefully you ask all these questions so I get answers. And it sounds like you had the same questions as me. Like, what did he build in the probability that Tom Brady, let's say they score on 4th down. There's 2 minutes, and they probably take it down to the 2.2-minute warning then, or close to it. So Tom Brady has several timeouts, maybe the 2-minute warning. What's the probability that he can drive? I mean, Tampa Bay had been crushing it on special teams all day. They probably had decent field position, worst case 25. So you got to drive 40 yards, go kick a field goal. I think that's a big part of the equation, because you say you have to stop him on getting a couple first downs, but getting a couple first downs almost puts you in field goal position if you ended up getting the score, getting the 2-point conversion, which is in likelihood actually pretty much a coin flip. Those are close to 50%. So you got to win a lot of coin flips, but I probably would have been right there at like the 20-25% range. And, it's maddening watching that 3rd down replay where he had all the run, even if he got crushed at the goal line and stopped, 4th and 1 is a lot different than 4th and 8. So I really wish he would have taken off there.
There's a number, I think. So let me just preface this. I think David Howe and Miller and Deck Prism are extremely sharp. I almost always, and even like in private DMs with other people, I almost always say, okay, where are you at? Where is Deck Prism at? Where am I? Like, so I'm almost always hopeful that I'm directionally the same as them. The one, and I agree that like the 8. So we saw this in a playoff game last year too. when the Philadelphia Eagles were down 17-9 and they went for a relatively long fourth down. I think it was a little bit further out. I support kicking the field goal the further and further you get away from the 2-minute warning, because, and I tweeted this out in the time, I said, like, the Packers should not treat this drive like they're down by 1 score. Like, they're not. They're down by 1.5 scores. So they have a 50% chance of being down 2 scores or 1 score. And I think that in the general, so in that sense, I'm very similar in the mindset as they are. I wonder, though, like, just from thinking through the probabilities, and I'm really interested in seeing what they have to say, like, what do they think a probability of going 75 yards with 1 or 0 timeouts against Tampa's defense would be for the Packers? Because I think that's non-stationary. So I had a call, like, probably what was it, Seattle, Minnesota, where we give the win probabilities to NBC, and they said, like, this is the go for it situation. I got a call from somebody in the league saying, this is way too high. If you look at historical data of teams going X amount of yards in the final X minutes with no timeouts, they've only scored a touchdown like 5% of the time. And so, whereas we had it more like about 10, 12% of the time. And I think David Allen Miller and Deck Prism are probably thinking, well, it's even more non-stationary than that, right? The league is more and more in favor of scoring. Rodgers is better than most. So, and the market is what the market is. And I asked you this, Rufus, and I want to hear what you have to say. Is part of it also the fact that there is a long shot bias in markets, and and they're sort of, I mean, they're not necessarily tracking with the market. They're trying to be the market, which, and they're doing a great job of it. But is that part of it too? Like, traders are almost always taking the plus 300 as opposed to laying the minus 350 or whatever.
Well, I mean, so the favorite long shot bias, if you look at it overall, I mean, it tends to be kind of, at least in the NFL, the opposite. It tends to be a bias more towards the favorites. The favorite long shot bias historically is big in horse racing.
Okay.
But hold on. I was pulling up a box score now for the Bucs game because I wanted to see how many times inside the 10.
You got the ESPN autoplay
inside the 10 and they didn't score, and it started autoplaying the video. But no. So in the NFL, like, there's more value in general betting underdog money lines and underdog favorites by far. Not even close. Like, there's often value on underdog money lines. And I think the bias is that people like the underdog payouts. That's why they parlay these favorites on the money line. So I don't know that actually applies to live, but regardless, I mean, Deck Prism has their number as far as I know, and then they have the number that they're sort of booking, like based, because they're trying to, if they think that the market is, like, everybody else is really wrong, they're not gonna put it right exactly what their number is. They're going to, I assume. But I assume the number he was quoting to me was also their actual number at that point. So, and to your point, like, about the NFL changing, yes. And Matt and I have talked about this, like, a good amount this year, actually, where he says that the NFL in the last 5 years is very different. And at least, like, some of my second half stuff, like, he thinks I'm overvaluing, or I'm undervaluing the team down 2 scores, getting that late touchdown. To pull it back in, and just given the fact that, like, there are more good offenses, I guess, and so,
it's an interesting problem, because I am, like I said, I was a little, I'm trying to unpack how they got their numbers too, and again, like I said, like, I'm really interested to see how they arrived at it, because they're usually right, and so. The chances of them being right here are probably pretty high. It's just I'm looking forward to seeing why.
Yeah, I mean, he said he won't be able to say. He won't be able to say absolutely everything, but he's hopeful that.
Well, a good host will squeeze that out of him.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but I'm definitely interested in getting into some of the details of them.
Because modern machine learning models need more. Like, that's the hard part. The modern machine learning models need more data to be able to accurately price the probabilities. But to Matthew's point, the league, and the NFL is I consider the NFL a high column, low row league. There's a ton of variables, and there aren't actually that many plays. If you think about it that way, and if you reduce it down to the post 15-yard PAT era, that's not that many games, that's not that many plays, and that's not that many situations like the one we saw the other day. And so models like NFL Fast R, which I think is really good, frankly, and our stuff like they all do the same thing, which is they take the historical data and they price out the probability that a game lands 3, 4, all that stuff. And I think a simulation based one is probably better to Matt's point in terms of being able to sort of leverage the sort of edge cases, and Rodgers probably represents one of those. It's interesting because given the way that the course of that game played out, I think Rodgers is one of the variables, but the other one is, of course, like the Tampa Bay defense being actually really good at locking down the wide receivers for Green Bay. So that's probably why I would sort of fall in the middle of what I had and what they had.
Yeah, and you make a good point with the machine learning stuff, and I think simulation models, if you can do them right, are the way to go, because you don't need new data. You don't need like 10 years of data. You can tweak a parameter here, and essentially you can change fourth down decision-making decisions, or you can basically you can create all these little changes without having data and see what happens. And so simulation models are just really hard to do well.
Yeah. I was going to say that it'd be lovely if I know how to do something like that.
You have a extraordinary capacity to fuck them up. I tried building an MLB simulation model, which is probably the easiest one to do in a way. I mean, because it's based off. I already had a winning MLB model based on inference stuff, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna just make it even better. I'm gonna simulate. Okay, was it a line drive? Was it a ground ball? Did the ground ball get out of the infield? Then conditional on that, what's the probability it's a single or double or whatever? And I ended up it ended up being worse than what I already had. Because it's just there's so many things you have to do right. You have decision, in that case, managerial decisions when somebody's being pinch hit, which pitcher's coming in from the bullpen. You have to do it right just to essentially
because the errors compound if you
tuned.
The problem with bottom-up models is the errors compound and become bigger than some of the original errors. And so, the machine learning models being top-down, you sort of some of the errors cancel each other out. But then, of course, on the edge cases, you have problems with situations like these, or even stuff we talked about last week, Rufus, and we had this discussion internally. If you're looking at a betting model and you have Brady being Brady, having played a lot of cold weather games, but Tampa being Tampa and all that kind of stuff. There's probably no machine learning model worth anything that's going to be able to have, those 3 columns have a 1 or 0 and be useful at all. It's going to be overfit. It's going to be nonsense. But then if you have a simulation again, if you're wrong about any one of those 3 variables, they trickle through the entire simulant. So that's what makes modeling hard. That's why not everybody has a private island yet.
Right.
That's the depressing part about football. I think it's just we've run into this time and time again. As far as you say the 15-yard extra point, but it's so hard to find. If that's your line of demarcation, that's fine, and we do that sometimes because that did make a big change in some of the not a big change, but a change in the scoring. But just where do you draw the line as far as offenses are better now, or they're more offensive minded coaches. There's more offensive minded, just the ethos of a team. The general thinking is we're going to take advantage of these rules that are changing. We're going to score a lot of points. We're going to concentrate on this. You've seen teams do that and succeed, but where did that happen? Where exactly, where are we cutting things off? Because the more you cut off, the shittier your sample gets. And we always run into this. Should we even be looking at these games because they happened 9 years ago? Was it the same NFL? And that's where I have a lot of trouble with just straight modeling anything.
I think it depends on the question you're trying to ask too.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I use upwards of 15, 20 years of data for some particular things. And this becomes really relevant this week with props. especially. So, I mean, it's like, because I'm not running simulations, but I think to your point though, with the edge cases in the machine learning model, I think that's a huge weakness of machine learning. And it's why you don't really see, you don't see in play odds generally in most books up at the very end of the game. I mean, because the books don't have models. They don't have models that they trust to hold up there. They're going to be getting taken advantage of. And it's what Deck Prism Evangelize is about. Like they have the ability, and they put like years of work into this. I know that.
They're very.
Nobody is. Yeah, I don't respect anybody in the sports betting world as much as I respect Matt David now. So like, I mean, but we're able to. They evangelize about the fact that they'll be able to have lines up the entire game, which is they have the it takes a lot of work obviously to do what they did, but it's not the easy way. But I think it's hopefully gonna become more widespread. They'll get more influence, and so that you will have a live betting market that truly is available up until the end of the game.
Yeah, I mean, Rufus, to your point about hold on.
I was wondering who.
We're now going to have to wait with bated breath for what Eric was going to ask. I
don't need you citing.
What were you going to say, Eric?
I was going to say, Rufus, your point about like non-stationarity. I mean, the fact is there's like a prop at the beginning of a game that is whether or not the first kickoff is going to be a touchback, right? And that for the longest time, kicking a touchback was the positive EV move, right? Because the 20, different 20 is a worse play than the 25, obviously. And then, they changed the rule, and then more teams kick the ball short. And then they changed the rule again to make it so that you couldn't run up and, run up on and then it kind of became like a neutral move to kick it short or kick it deep. So now, like, how do you even price that out? And then you have obviously weather effects and team, and then you have a team that could just say, hey, we think this returner sucks and we're just going to kick it to them.
Right. I mean, like the way I used to do it, I'd have like a factor for like, the altitude of Denver for the wind and all that stuff, and basically be able to say, essentially I'd context neutralize it. But the whole point of that is I'm assuming that every team's trying to kick it as far as, trying to kick it deep. And so then you have to have, well, is the team actually trying to, like, in there too? And then there's like, oh, well, what's the, you have your typical kickoffs, then you have your first kickoffs, which sometimes coaches treat a little bit differently, different times of the game. Like I've studied Belichick kickoff patterns a lot, way too much over the years. And there's times when, and actually just watch video, and there's times when clearly he's trying to kick it for a touchback and other times when he isn't. So yeah, it's hard to do. Like, that's an information thing. Like, I mean, it's become for the kickoff stuff largely actually looking at film, like, and creating data yourself, like that is where you're actually looking at intent and all this other stuff.
I knew it was going to be an interesting debate, and I think we'll leave it to you and David Howe on your podcast, Rufus, to carry that conversation on, because it almost detracted from the game itself. So I guess the question is like that call aside and what happened with that. Do we think that Tampa Bay deserved to win the game? I mentioned that the Green Bay kind of had their chances, but great first half performance from Brady. So what are our thoughts on sort of how the game actually played out as a whole and the result?
I mean, weren't we disappointed with some of the play calling from Green Bay? And you don't take away from Tampa. Like, Tampa played a great game. Brady played a great game. They were missing a safety. They were missing a wide receiver. They still somehow had quite a few successful drives after ending 3 straight in interceptions. But the fact that, the last 2, Green Bay combined for -5 yards on 6 plays after the second and third interception. If you're going to have the GOAT, if you're going to have the MVP, if you're going to have this, a young offensive-minded head coach, and that's what you get from those 2 drives, I don't think you're going to beat that team all that often, even at home. So that was super disappointing to see. Just even as a neutral, if you were just watching that game from a neutral, Rodgers got the ball back, Brady airmailed that one to Evans, and then just seeing just a piss poor effort from, the play calling, and there were some drops, I suppose. But I think I was surprised more people didn't rail on and you do see it. I see it from Eric sometimes. I'm pretty sure it was Eric. Somebody had tweeted something about the draft picks, like the draft picks that actually got used. And I brought that up with somebody. It's like, man, when they traded for Love and whatever, if you can say Love, I don't buy the Love lit a fire under Rodgers' ass thing, but man, I mean, Claypool was out there. Mims would have been a nice addition. I mean, there was a Chenault. I mean, Green Bay couldn't have gotten one of the crop of like the high end receivers without giving up something that would have been too much for a receiver. But there was like 4 or 5 secondary receivers that got picked, in the second and third rounds that would have looked pretty good on that field. So maybe it's something.
It's not like their offense was bad this season.
No.
And I don't even think it was bad. It was bad the other day in the sequencing, right? Like I thought that Adams dropped a touchdown at the end of the first half, right? That could have probably tied the game. And then Rodgers throws a pick to Murphy Bunting when Murphy Bunting held Lazard pretty badly. Like there's a lot of noise, right? And then obviously you can go to the other side and say, well, Brady threw 3 straight interceptions, and that's of course noisy too. But I don't know. Like I think whoever was going to come, the Packers were sort of invincible, coming into the game as far as how they had played in recent weeks. I think after sort of grading it out, I gave Tampa like a small win, like 1 point. After everything was said and done using our grades, I come out of the game just impressed, sure, but not as impressed with either of these teams that I was with Kansas City, of course. To me, I think Tampa's probably lucky to be here. Like in all, as far as the New Orleans game being a turnover fest, the Washington game, even their defense played like crap, and they also didn't play very well as far as the drops and all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't think the Bucs have like breezed through the NFC. Say, the last team that made the Super Bowl as a wild card, the 2010 Packers, like they were legitimately just boat race, outplaying teams, especially Atlanta in round 2. That, when I look at this Bucs team, I'm kind of like, oh, it's a cool story, but I'm not sitting here saying, like, if I'm, Kansas City, I'm not worried about Tampa at all. I think Tampa can beat the Chiefs if they play a great game, but I don't think that their likelihood of playing a great game is any bigger than Buffalo's.
The sequence at the end of the first half there too, or the end of the second quarter or whatever, like just, Drew brought that up yesterday, what a disappointment it was in the red zone, the one drive. It's like, man, I mean, how low of a percentage is it that Adams drops that? Was that first and goal? He drops that touchdown. Like you don't have the second, third, you don't have the other bad plays. Like he should have caught that ball. That changes a lot. If the other drive doesn't end in the weird Scotty Miller touchdown, I mean, just the aggressiveness from Tampa impressed me there from a coach that I've ragged on a little. Yeah. So, I mean, kudos to them there. But, yeah, the game kind of turned pretty sharply there towards the end of the second quarter, and it's tough to recover. And, to Rodgers' credit and LaFleur in the offense, like they did score touchdowns in 2 consecutive drives there in the third quarter and made it a game. But then what was it, 3 points after that?
They had 2 inside the 10 possessions where I think they threw to Adams 5 times and were 0 for 5. And like, I think that's where the people who ding their draft can have some, can come up for water a little bit and say, look, if you have another receiver that you trust, then that's a place to have him. But at the same time, like, I mean, Adams had a great season and played a great game. And like, they put a lot of stock in the fact that he can get open in 2.5 seconds or less and they could throw him the football. And that didn't work out as much in this game. And that happens, I don't know. I'm a little bit, if I'm a Packers fan, I'm a little bit pissed off that they didn't draft the corner because Kevin King is a disaster. And that entire game, I think the play call, obviously at the end of the half was worse than his coverage. But like they also they had him singled up all game and he was just getting abused over and over again. So to me, just not being as resilient defensively as you should be is probably, if I'm a Packers fan, my biggest concern.
Well, I mean, if you're a Packers fan, you don't like the draft because it's not maximizing or you don't like it for this year because it's not maximizing their short-term, their odds of winning in this window. But at the same time, what they're balancing the future or the present with the future. And I think it's something that most GMs do a terrible job of doing. And it's nice if you have the security to be able to actually do that and say, and just like, I mean, look what happened. They drafted Rodgers when Favre was still playing. I mean, that was a wasted first round pick, I guess, if you think about it that way. Like, I mean, I don't want to comment on whether like there was value there or there's value with Love. I mean, I probably thought he shouldn't have been a first rounder, but he'll probably end up being league MVP at some point or something. And then years later, we'll be talking about how Green Bay was how they had such foresight to basically invest in the future, like rather than just trying to put out fires and trying to maximize their current window.
Yeah, the tricky thing is now the rookie deal is where the edge is, right? As far as with the elite level play, if you sit a quarterback for 2 out of 4 years, you're wasting half of the cost control years where you can spend that money on other players. And that's why, like, and this is not going to turn into a draft podcast, but like, that's why when you look at like Steelers, Saints, all those teams, like all the teams, Saints are actually going to be fine, but like all the team, like Matt Ryan, all those teams that have high end quarterbacks on big salaries, if they draft a young guy, like the edge is sort of slimmer because that guy's cheap, but he's not playing. So you're not getting anything for that, and then that money that should have gone to a quarterback is still going to a quarterback because it's the older guy that's in the room as well.
Right, but okay, the cheap quarterback only lasts so long. Like you had that with Seattle and Russell Wilson, Dallas and Dak Prescott, Rams.
Chiefs
aren't they going to get towards by the time we get to the end of the cheap window?
If you look at
Rodgers still playing,
the cheap window still isn't going to last forever. And I think it's a quarterback driven league, and most teams are not planning on switching quarterbacks every 4 years to try to find the cheap option.
Yeah, the cheap window though makes the quarterback decision easier, right? Because like look at like Darnold, for example. Like most of us think Darnold sucks, but really what we have no clue because the Jets took his 3 years of cost control and pissed it down their leg. So we have no idea whether or not Darnold's good. The value in the window is that you can pile talent. Like the Chiefs signed Sammy Watkins with $16 million per year deal, right? Like they can't do that if they're up against it cap wise. So they could do it with Mahomes' deal being what it is. And then you take those 3 years not only to have cost control and to possibly win, but you also take those years to give him the best environment around him to see if he can actually be good. Otherwise, you're sort of playing this game, this Blake Bortles game, where it's like, well, we really don't know. And then you're stuck in year 4 and you still have no clue. The same thing with Josh Allen. Like if Josh Allen sucked this year with all this stuff around him, you kind of know almost definitively that he was brutal.
I guess we're hoping that Darnold has just gotten gazed, and that's a and not that I'm putting a Tannehill in this super high echelon, but I certainly have a much higher rating on him than I did when he was under Gase. So hopefully, because I was high on Darnold, I've seen flashes of good things from Darnold. It's been a bad roster and a bad coaching situation for 3 years, and and this all the draft stuff it's really easy in hindsight, to say like, oh, take Pittman and then later on take a corner, and like I think who the Vikings take late in the second round. Was that Dantzler or Gladney or who the Titans took Fulton right around the same spot. So you could have Pittman and Fulton. That looks a lot better. It's easy to say in January, but at the same time, people were ragging on it while it was happening. So I'm fine with it then too.
I agree. And you guys are right about the salary cap, but I guess what I was saying is just the future considerations. Like, I mean, I think the Packers have done a good job of that historically. Yeah.
You have to give them a little benefit of the doubt because it's been a good front office for my lifetime. I don't know.
Because generally the problem is basically alignment of incentives, right? With GMs, they're incentivized to win in the short term, and it oftentimes at the expense of the long-term health of the franchise. It's a problem with world leaders too. I mean.
This podcast is going off on all sorts of tangents here.
The problems to the next generation.
Right, Eric said it's not a draft podcast.
Sorry.
We can get into politics though.
It's not a world leaders
Sensible Asian
podcast
talk,
either.
right?
Look, it's let's get on to the Super Bowl. We're 40 minutes in and we haven't even mentioned it yet. It's the main reason we're here. A lot of people will say that the value's gone within the first few hours of the line going up, but who knows what we might see. There's going to be a hell of a lot of money bet on it, and where that comes from, who's to say, but it could impact the market. At the moment, we're at Kansas City -3. The total did go up a little high. It was pitched up at 58 originally. It's currently sitting on 56. We know the numbers are going to be there or thereabouts, as I said, for unless there's some real big money coming in to shift things around. But where things are at the moment, Eric, I'll start with you. Is there any interest in these numbers? Have you got anything down, or is it just a watch and enjoy for the Chiefs win?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me right now, it's tricky. I would say, especially at 56, I don't think that there's. I can see both sides. I mean, I think I make the number like 56.2, which, this year I've added a little bit to early season, which is I think dissipated a little on the total. So maybe it's a little high, but given how I've adjusted this year, I think it's sort of right on. If you grade out the players, Tampa Bay has the most wins above replacement on its roster than any team in the NFL. The Chiefs are 5th. So the Chiefs are sort of getting by with less. You see that on their defensive side of the ball. No one's brilliant, but everybody's solid. Tampa Bay has a lot of great parts. So on that side, on that end, like you grade the players out, and especially at the most important places, Tampa might be value, but then you look at like sort of the power rankings we have, and our power rankings basically have KC more than 3 points better than the next best team in the NFL. This is a discussion maybe to have, but I don't know what home field is in this one. I'm basically pricing it as a neutral game. So I can't. I'm not. I think I took a Chiefs bet early, but I'm not that strong. That's just. I'm not all that strong on either side after sort of looking it through and sort of grading the players out after this last week.
Andy, what about yourself? And what good point there from Eric about the home advantage. Obviously, it's a unique one for the Super Bowl. Do you make anything of that? How are you treating it?
Yeah, I can't remember what we decided the total was for people that were going to let into the stadium. I think it was like 20,000 maybe. If that's the case, what Super Bowl tickets cost normally, like just especially what the secondhand market is for that. How many of those tickets already belong to like players and coaches that they're allowed to give away? And the fact that, it's not going to be some raucous Tampa crowd. It's going to be people who can afford to drop that kind of money, because when the supply drops by like 3/4 and the demand is still there, especially in this year, people wanting to go to anything. Like those Super Bowl tickets are going to be so spendy. I just don't see it being like a home crowd at all. It's just going to be a bunch of people with cash that want to go to the Super Bowl. It'll be cool because you'd be able to stretch your arms out a little if you get a ticket. So I'm putting home field at 0. The fact that KC, I'm looking into this because somebody mentioned the travel might be funny as far as the restrictions. That I'm not sure when they're going to let them go down there and enter the hotel bubble. I'm not sure if like Tampa is going to be in some sort of hotel bubble. So stuff I have to figure out. But for now, yeah, definitely at 0. I mean, the number came where we thought it'd come. I'm not interested in the side here. We saw some weird look aheads. Somebody had a total up at like 59 and said, well, if they open like that, it's going to get hit down hard. Even the 58s, 57s got hit down hard. I made the number lower, but I still had no interest in betting it under. Like I'm not. There's a lot of long tail that ends up in the 70s here. I think Tampa Bay's smart enough to know that what they just saw McDermott do. It's not a team that you beat by let's play keep away. It just doesn't work. It hasn't worked. You go back and look at historically the teams that have beaten the Chiefs under the Mahomes-Reed era. When they've beaten the Chiefs, it's going score for score, track meet. It's outscoring them, outplaying them on their against their defense. So I'm not excited that my numbers want an under, so I probably won't bet one. I'm probably all props all the time. I had more money on the Puppy Bowl than I did on anything for the Super Bowl last year, just because somebody knew how the Puppy Bowl ended, and some people were taking some silly numbers on that. So, yeah, a lot of props. Puppy Bowl, you got the anthem, all that fun stuff. I probably won't have a cider total. I have a small position that Drew talked me into when we were betting preseason. That was Mahomes, MVP, and KC to win it all were similarly priced. And I said, well, let's just split those up then. So I'll be rooting for KC, but the number's pretty good.
And Rufus, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of your work at the end of the season goes into the props, does it not? But is there we can put the props aside for 1 week at least, but the main lines, is there anything of interest to you?
Yeah, no, nothing of interest to me there right now at the time. It'll be interesting to see how it gets bet, because the Super Bowl is unique in the fact that like it isn't like right now, sure, the sharp money is influencing the line, but in a week and a half, it's going to be public money that's influencing that number. And just because there is generally so much more public money bet on the Super Bowl than any other game. So there may be an opportunity at some point. Like, obviously, I hope that people love, I hope that the over gets bet a ton and that I'm able to get a nice sweet under, like close to game time. But we shall see. But yes, my exposure will be mostly on props.
Well, look, all that wait for the Super Bowl talk, and we absolutely breezed through it. One of the
don't bet
again. I was just going to say one of the interesting elements that the props and stuff that's going to be interesting to talk about, and I think maybe we can dedicate some time to that next week, and it might be good as well to sort of come back to those Super Bowl numbers, as you said, Rufus, when that public money comes in, and see if anyone's mind's changed on that. But for the time being, at least, Eric, Andy, and Rufus, thank you very much for coming on and sharing your insight. Thank you to everyone for tuning in, and you can get all the latest odds on pinnacle.com. But remember to please